Welcome to the third in a special series of podcasts accompanying Bigeye's national study, Retail Disrupted, What Shoppers Want from Brands Today. Coming up,
people are much more aware of the power they have as a consumer and that they need to use that wisely.
There will also need to be an increased emphasis on reduction of waste from suppliers and on domestic recycling ventures.
Refillable packaging has been a really trendy category to look at.
The pandemic has prompted many consumers to reassess their lifestyle and in particular their shopping behavior as well. So I think there is a new trend.
You're listening to a special episode of In Clear Focus, fresh perspectives on the business of advertising, produced weekly by Bigeye. Hello, I'm your host, Adrian Tennant, VP of Insights at Bigeye, a full-service, audience-focused creative agency. We're based in Orlando, Florida, serving clients across the United States and beyond. Thank you for joining us. In August of this year, Bigeye conducted a national survey of over 1,500 shoppers aged 18 to 55 that reveals how shoppers' behaviours have changed during the pandemic and what they want and expect from brands today. In today's podcast, we're going to explore some of the data points that reveal which factors influence their brand choices. We'll discuss consumers' attitudes toward recycling, upcycling, and sustainability, and consider what the findings mean for retail and direct-to-consumer marketers. Last year saw a surge of activism among Americans looking for ways to advocate for the issues that matter most to them. It's estimated that around 26 million Americans participated in demonstrations over the death of George Floyd and others in 2020, making Black Lives Matter the largest movement in the country's history. Many retailers and brands showed support for the movement on social media with Blackout Tuesday, a collective action to protest racism and police brutality. Today's socially conscious consumers buy from companies that donate a portion of their proceeds towards a certain cause or whose business practices support a particular group or value. Generation Z, those born between 1996 and 2012, and Millennials or Gen Y, those born between 1980 and 1995, are increasingly demanding that companies take a stand on social issues, with over half of these younger shoppers more likely to purchase from a store if they know it supports a cause or community they care about. One way that socially conscious consumerism is changing the retail industry is through re-commerce, the selling of pre-owned or pre-used products online. Depop is the fastest growing peer-to-peer social shopping app, and around 32 million items are available. You can think of it as a hybrid of eBay and Pinterest. Users scroll through listings of used items, including clothing and accessories from luxury brands such as Chanel and Hermes, and they can buy, sell, or donate products. The resale market is growing 11 times faster than traditional retail, especially among younger shoppers. These consumer behaviours are expressions of the so-called circular economy that prioritises the use of sustainable materials while keeping products in circulation for as long as possible. The concept is not new. In 1961, Kenneth Boulding first wrote about the economy of the coming spaceship Earth, where he described how our planet's limited resources must be conserved. With the effects of climate change being felt across the globe, consumers increasingly expect companies and brands to choose sustainable materials, reduce wasteful packaging, and minimize their carbon footprints. Data points from Bigeye's national study reveal how widespread recycling and upcycling behaviors are and highlight key differences that exist between generations of consumers. A HuffPost article published in 2016 found that every American, on average, throws away around 81 pounds of clothing each year, even though 95% of it could be reused or recycled. Today, that's changing, as we see more interest in the circular economy, as well as consumers disenchanted with the speed at which brands and governments are addressing climate change. London-based trend forecaster The Future Laboratory has dubbed an emerging group of consumers regenizens, using technology, communities and entrepreneurship to further entrench the post-ownership ideal. But how widespread are these behaviours? In Bigeye's national study, across all respondents, approaching 2 in every 5 report buying previously owned clothes or accessories from a thrift store, 38%, and donating items of clothing to a charity, also 38%, in the past 6 months. Around 1/5 have bought from a store specialising in pre-owned or vintage clothing and swapped clothes with a friend. Gen Z respondents are the most likely overall to engage in these activities, with Gen Y being very similar in its behaviour to Gen Z. Gen X, made up of respondents born between 1965 and 1979, is the most likely to have donated items of clothing to a charity, such as Goodwill, at 45%, compared to 27% of Gen Z. But at just 4%, Gen X is 3 times less likely to have used an app to swap clothes with other people than Gen Z, among whom 12% report doing so. Respondents identifying as female are more likely than other gender identities to engage in these activities, with the single exception of buying clothing items on eBay, where males are very slightly more likely to do so at 13%. Respondents identifying as Hispanic are more likely than non-Hispanics to engage in eco-conscious activities, with the single exception of donating items to a charity, where non-Hispanics are 13 points more likely to do so at 41%. However, Hispanic respondents are 13 points more likely to have bought from a store specialising in pre-owned clothing at 31% compared to 18% of non-Hispanics. Earlier this year, I asked Ksenia Newton, a content strategist at Brandwatch, whether Gen Z and millennials' adoption of pre-owned, vintage and thrift store clothing reflects a shift in consumer behaviour away from so-called fast fashion.
While Gen Z and millennials were mostly concerned last year about their health and jobs, both generations remain deeply concerned about the environment still. So that's one thing. And also, I think the pandemic has prompted many consumers to reassess their lifestyle and in particular, their shopping behavior as well. I think there is a new trend. People are reassessing how they shop. And I think fast fashion can coexist with secondhand shopping. But I also do think that a lot of people are reassessing, really looking into maybe when it comes to fashion specifically, maybe looking into better fabric. More ethically produced fabric and something that they can wear over a longer period of time, or to reuse the existing items. I do think it's a new trend.
This was a topic I also explored with Chantal Schmelz, a strategist and marketer based in Zurich, Switzerland. Chantal is working with an innovative textile startup called Yarn to Yarn that addresses recycling in a unique way.
Probably a lot of people already know cradle to cradle as a concept of circular economy. And yarn to yarn is kind of the adaptation to the textile industry, where you use materials that can either be easily separated once clothes are being returned after use. For example, you need to be very careful what patches you sew onto your clothes, what color imprints you use, what tags you use, what buttons, what zippers, because they need to be ripped off before the reuse can start. And also, like with cradle to cradle, it's essential that you don't mix raw materials in a way that they cannot be separated anymore. So you don't glue it, you nail it, because then it can be separated. And with yarn to yarn, you use fibers that can be separated chemically or with bioenzymes easily, so that in the end you have cotton and polyethylene fibers as raw materials in the end, so you can have new yarn created out of the raw materials easily. So it's the same process as cradle to cradle for the textile industry. And at the moment, it's based on a bioenzyme process that allows to separate cotton and polyethylene fibers so that they can be totally 100% reused at the end.
I asked Chantal why she thought Gen Z and millennials are expressing greater interest in re-commerce and recycling than older generations.
I think the awareness of climate change and sustainability issues have become widely known especially amongst younger ones who have the perspective of living way longer than we will be on this beautiful planet. So they see what's going on with like old-fashioned industry, and they see that they need to change their behaviors now. And I also think it's especially in these ages, 18, 26, in between, they haven't formed their consumer patterns so much until then, as probably you and I already did. So it's going to be much harder to turn around our consumer patterns than with the younger generations. So I think they are the early adopters in that case, reconsidering the power they have as a consumer to make an impact on the industries, because there are bigger brands who now recognize that if they want to keep a stable consumer base in the future, they will have to adapt to those trends now and come up with e-commerce possibilities, products, solutions to go with this development.
I asked Chantal if she was seeing a rejection of fast fashion in Europe.
I would say that we see public outrage whenever there's like a new media article or report about, for example, a few months back, there was this report on Amazon destroying all returns because it's too much of an effort to reuse them. So if they're returns, they're just destroyed. So huge public outburst. However, living in a high-price country, the temptation to smuggle in some of the fast fashion into your shopping, because otherwise you will only buy one shirt per year. I think there's still a long way to go before there's, you could say, it's a rejection of fast fashion. I think people are much more aware. They are more aware also of the power they have as a consumer and that they need to use that wisely. Rejection, I wouldn't say yet.
Finally, I asked Chantal in what other ways she sees socially conscious consumerism influencing brand marketing.
I think at the moment, because there's these public outburst reactions blaming a lot of fashion brands, but also other brands like grocery stores have already picked up on that trend, implementing specific labels on the products showing CO2 impact of production from this product to kind of give the impression that they also care and to make it easier for you as a consumer to make a wise decision.
It's not just Gen Z and millennials that are interested in re-commerce. In a recent interview, applied cognitive neuroscientist Michael Smith, who's the author of the book Inspiring Green Consumer Choices, shared an anecdote about his son, who belongs to the next generation, dubbed Alpha.
One time over the summer, I took my son, who had just graduated from middle school, into a thrift store, and he had never been acquainted with the context. And he was thrilled by it to learn that he could get a perfectly good piece of clothing for a huge discount relative to department store prices. And he just liked the thrill of being able to repurpose goods.
Michael pointed out that there's one type of re-commerce that most of us have direct experience with already.
You know, we don't really think of it very often as a resale organization when we think of things like clothing and whatnot. But I was struck recently by something we have long taken for granted as a somewhat unsavory task, but is somewhat of an iconic form of re-commerce. And that is the buying and selling of used cars, a really big ticket item that happens to virtually every car over the course of its lifetime. And, you know, traditionally it was hard to learn about a vehicle's history, its reliability, its current mechanical status. It was hard to compare between alternatives because they weren't really comparable. And one didn't really trust the claims of the seller. And, you know, beyond that, negotiating fair pricing was frequently a nightmare, at least on the consumer side. But in the US, one of the biggest re-commerce operations to emerge in recent years is the company CarMax, mainly an internet-based platform with a gigantic inventory And they work to increase trust in transactions by being easy to shop from, by de-risking the purchase, by, making it easy to return a car, and by being trustworthy and transparent about the vehicle's history. They document it online for you to check, and as well as its current mechanical status, and by eliminating the pain of price negotiations. They'll tell you the price. You can decide if you think it's fair based on all your research, and you can take as much time as you want to do that. As a result, they've been hugely successful in the marketplace since their inception. I think other e-commerce operations could learn a lot by studying them.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back after these messages.
I'm Marissa Martin on Bigeye's operations team. Every week, Bigeye's podcast, In Clear Focus, explores how consumer behaviors are evolving as a result of COVID-19. From the influence of Generation Z, with its interest in social and environmental issues, to the fast-growing Hispanic market and the opportunity it presents, Bigeye interprets signals from primary and secondary research, identifying the trends driving consumer spending today and those that will have the greatest impact tomorrow. If you'd like to put Bigeye's research-backed, data-driven insights to work for your brand, please contact us. Email info@bigeyeagency.com. Bigeye, reaching the right people in the right place at the right time.
Today's shoppers are more informed, connected, and demanding than ever before. To examine how the rise of e-commerce during the pandemic has disrupted the retail industry, Bigeye recently conducted a national study with over 1,500 consumers. Our exclusive report, Retail Disrupted: What Shoppers Want from Brands Today, reveals that while people enjoy the convenience of online ordering and home delivery, many still prefer to shop in physical stores. But their expectations of merchandise selections, in-store technology, and customer service are all heightened. To understand consumers' new shopping behaviors and mindsets, and what they mean for retailers, direct-to-consumer marketers, and traditional brands, download the full complimentary report, available now at bigeye.agency/retail. Retail Disrupted: What Shoppers Want from Brands Today. Welcome back. You're listening to Retail Disrupted: What Shoppers Want from Brands Today. So, which factors are most likely to impact personal brand choices? In Bigeye's national study, for almost 9 in every 10 respondents, the most important factor is the visual appeal of the product. 89% say this is extremely, very, or somewhat important to them. Almost 4 in every 5 shoppers say that a brand's policies and stances related to the environment and sustainability are important, 79%, with similar percentages citing whether a brand is based in or manufactures its products in the USA, 78%, and whether a brand is local to their community or a small business, 77%. Respondents identifying as male are 3 points more likely than females to say that a brand's policies and stances relating to the environment and sustainability are important to their choices, 81%, while all of those identifying as non-binary or other gender select whether the packaging is made from sustainable materials or can be recycled or upcycled. Let's take a closer look at how brand choices are influenced by the generation to which respondents belong. Among Gen Z, 48% think that whether the packaging is made from sustainable materials or can be recycled or upcycled is extremely or very important. 45% think a brand's policies and stances related to race, gender equality, or LGBTQIA+ issues are extremely or very important. Now, among Gen Y, 44% think a brand's policies and stances related to the environment and sustainability are extremely or very important. 43% think a brand's policies and stances related to race, gender equality, or LGBTQIA+ issues are extremely or very important. And among Gen X respondents, 46% think that whether a brand is based in or manufactures its products in the USA is extremely or very important. And 40% think a brand's policies and stances related to the environment and sustainability are extremely or very important. When it comes to physical retail stores, refill, recycle, and reuse top Gen Z's wish list. The so-called Regenizens eco-conscious behaviours are reflected in our study results, with over 1/4 of Gen Z respondents wanting department stores to make it easier to refill reusable containers, 26%, including those used for beauty and skincare products. This is Gen Z respondents' most important consideration, 5 points higher than Gen Y and 8 points more than Gen X. Respondents identifying as Hispanic are 4 points more likely to select this, at 24%, than non-Hispanics. Gen Z are also more likely than other generations to want the ability to drop off recyclable waste so it can be upcycled into new products, 25%. I recently spoke with Brandon Frank, the CEO of Pacific Packaging Components and an expert on sustainability, clean beauty, and recycling. With over 3/4 of all respondents in our study saying that whether a product's packaging is made from sustainable materials or can be recycled or upcycled is important to them, I asked Brandon how brands have been responding to these changing consumer attitudes.
The selection of glass and aluminum has continued to be popular, and that when plastic needs to be used, the most sustainable option and that most people are going toward it is to use the highest percentage of post-consumer recycled resin as possible. We know that there's a lot of bio-based resins and other biodegradable additives and things like that, but we follow the sustainable packaging guidelines, and we really say that, if you're going to use plastic, use the highest percentage of PCR that you can. There's a lot of supply chain issues with that right now because the largest companies in the world are buying up most of the highest quality PCR, which leaves a lot of large, middle, and small brands struggling to be able to meet MOQs and price points. But the industry is responding.
I asked Brandon if he sees any emerging trends in recyclable and sustainable packaging materials.
Refillable packaging has been a really trendy topic or category to look at. There haven't been a lot of examples where consumer buy-in has been at the same level of the excitement around the packaging, which basically means that sell-through hasn't been as strong as everyone thought. But I think consumer behavior around refillable containers in their homes, trying to reduce the amount of packaging, will continue to be one of the kind of driving themes when it comes to packaging use, and brands making decisions based on that as well. So that may materialize instead of having a bunch of 6-ounce, 8-ounce soap bottles that we're just selling, is that maybe there's a extra durable plastic one or a glass one with a flexible pouch with a refillable spout that can be refilled, that glass container 6 or 8 times, or tablets to where you drop in a tablet, add water, and kind of mix it up, and now you've got a concentrate. So brands really trying to find ways to just reduce the amount of packaging that they're putting out there in the world, and consumers responding to that.
I asked Michael Smith which consumer behaviours, newly adopted during the ongoing COVID pandemic, he expects to see more of in the future.
Well, this is somewhat speculative, but I think confronting the fact that we're living in a world with significant price inflation at the retail level is probably not going to change anytime soon. And part of that is just because prices have historically been artificially depressed, because they don't account for environmental impacts, and because we have been largely offshoring the pollution and waste associated with the creation and disposal of those products. A strategy that has become obvious is less and less tenable. So we're going to have to learn to incorporate the costs of consumer items, the true costs, including the environmental costs, into the price for those items. And as a result, prices inevitably are going to go up. I think there will also need to be an increased emphasis on reduction of waste from suppliers and an increased emphasis on domestic recycling ventures. Again, largely because we no longer can effectively depend on other countries to import our trash. They don't want it. It's not that profitable for them, and we're getting stuck with it. So, the retail sector has to learn to work with domestic recycling companies to better match their packages and ingredients and whatnot with the capabilities of the domestic recycling sector. Just as evidence of that emerging trend, the biggest company in the collection end of Waste Management, Inc., since the beginning of the pandemic, their stock price has shot up about 60 or 70%, and their revenue has bloated because they have competitive advantages at, managing waste at scale, disposing of what needs to be disposed, extracting what's valuable from that waste stream, and even harvesting biofuels like the methane that trash fills generate, and using that either for selling or for running their own fleet of vehicles. So it's integrated organizations like that are domestic who are going to have the upper hand, I think, going forward and addressing some of these issues. And, they have the scale that they can put pressure on retailers to have better integrated operations.
It's clear from the data in our study and the insights shared by our guests that brand marketers and retailers will need to adopt new practices to engage more socially and eco-conscious consumers, such as communicating the sources of products, ingredients, and raw materials clearly to meet younger consumers' desire for greater transparency around these factors. Reviewing and, where applicable, cleaning up manufacturing practices and policies. Companies with opaque supply chains or suspected of greenwashing can expect to face greater scrutiny and the potential for significant consumer backlash. Offering refillable, recyclable, and upcycling options across a broader variety of product categories, beyond just detergents and beauty items. And highlighting in-store waste collection initiatives and real-time upcycling as key components of differentiated in-store brand experiences. You've been listening to the third episode of Retail Disrupted, What Shoppers Want from Brands Today. My thanks to all the contributors to this episode: Ksenia Newton, Chantal Schmelz, Michael Smith, and Brandon Frank. To download the full report on which this podcast is based, go to bigeye.agency/retail, where you can also watch the on-demand webinar highlighting results from our national study. I've been your host, Adrian Tennant, VP of Insights at Bigeye. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.